was standing amid racks of magazines, enjoying the church's youth choir regaling the Barnes & Noble customers with sacred holiday music just before Christmas. Perched just below eye level, on that magazine stand, were these cover stories and titles from a wide collection of periodicals. Being yourself is good enough. What makes you who you are? Check in with yourself. Your best you. Start feeling happier ASAP. Self-healing. Your personality interpreted. An 8-point plan for creating your best year ever. New year, new you. My personal favorite, though, was from a magazine that I had never heard of before. The magazine is called Project Calm. The article I liked was entitled, Find Your Wild. The magazine is called Calm, for goodness sake. Isn't wild the opposite of calm? Maybe a new magazine, but it sounds like they need a new editor. But notice in this assortment of publications that the titles contain the letters Y-O-U. Boy, do they make a statement. Each title focuses on, puts a spotlight on the self. None of them, not one, was about doing anything for anyone except oneself. You won't find a meaningful life concentrating on yourself. And that doesn't just come from a pastor who finished reading a gospel lesson a few minutes ago. As a matter of fact, the eminent Harvard behavioral psychologist and author Arthur Brooks, on August 12th, less than a month ago, released a new book about happiness and a meaningful life. For 35 years, he's been studying happiness. And he said there are 4 pillars of happiness that he can conclude coming from his research. Those pillars are faith, interesting number 1. Faith. Family. Friendships. And work that serves others. Whether that's volunteer work, whether that's your career, whether that's, a temporary job. However you work to serve others, that's the 4th criterion. There is nothing about happiness correlating with selfishness, with only considering oneself. That doesn't lead to happiness. By the way, if you want some uplifting reading after watching the news or reading the newspaper or your news feed, purchase Dr. Brooks' book, The Happiness Files, Insights on Work and Life. I was so inspired by what I read and when I was listening to him that I might do a Sunday school class, just probably a 1, maybe a 2-class Sunday school class on that book because it brings a whole lot of our faith. And he's not, an expressed Christian. He's just a researcher. But boy, good stuff. So, in July, if you were here, you may remember that we heard sermons from the book of Judges. Despite being separated by eons from that long ago time of Judges, we learned that there are numerous parallels to our 21st century lives. The freed Hebrew slaves found themselves in a time of transition and upheaval for years. Sound familiar? They could not return to the past. And the so-called promised land that they were in was really no peach of a life at this point either. The other book, the Gospel of Matthew, is also written for people in transition, albeit centuries later. Judges was written long, long ago. Matthew was only written about 2,000 years ago, which is still long ago for us. And so this transition is how devout Jews were to become devout Christians. That's Matthew's focus. And he wrote all of these things down from Jesus because the Jews were wondering, what must now change and be made new as Jesus followers? I mean, we're Jews, for goodness sake, but we've come to love Jesus. How does this work? What should be honored? What should be maintained from our Jewish lives, our Jewish heritage? What from the temple and the synagogue is to be included in this new gathering called the church? Will worship look the same or different? What does one do with the ancient Jewish scriptures once Jesus, this long-awaited and predicted Messiah, actually arrives? Because, as we know, the Christ arrived. So now what? Both books, Judges and Matthew, were written about people who were in life during an in-between time, when everything just seemed to be up in the air. There's the past, there's the future, and there's the now, this in-between time. Judaism the Jewish faith was relatively new in the time of the book of Judges, just like Christianity was in its infancy during the time that Matthew was writing. Both presented a new way to see God, a new way to relate to God. Even still, God's love never changed. Amid everything, God could still be counted on. Well, what does that look like? In this 21st century, in this current era of transition, with massive changes in our culture, with disagreements among Christians over the Bible, with tectonic changes ahead for the United Methodist Church, mainline Protestantism, and just Christianity in general. What's that mean for us? How do we remain faithful? To what do we cling? What really is foundational for us? From what? From whom do we and will we take our identity? And the biggest question of all, can we still count on God? Now, listening to Jesus preaching that Sermon on the Mount were two sets of people. The disciples, and not just the capital D, 12 disciples. Jesus had a lot of other men and women who were quite loyal followers to him. The 12 disciples get all the credit, right? Kind of like presidents of the United States. They get all the credit. There's a whole lot of people working in their administration underneath them. Same thing. There were a lot of disciples in addition to the 12. Disciples were Jesus' students. Disciple is a word that means students. It actually translates learner. What a learner is a student, right? Disciples were committed to Jesus. Emphasis on the word committed. The crowd, certainly interested in Jesus, but by and large not committed to him. Yes, they learned some important things from him. What they heard from him satisfied their curiosity, but they really didn't let his teachings impact their lives. You know, it was kind of like going to a sports event or a concert. Great entertainment, but not life-altering. You know, if you watched the Eagles game the other night against Dallas, that was a good game. You were really entertained. But I don't think any of you called me up the next day and say, "Oh my gosh, Pastor, that game changed my life. I will never be the same again," right? No. The disciples on one hand, the crowd on the other. Which are you? And so whether you are a committed disciple or someone in the crowd, today let's all consider ourselves to be some of Jesus' students. Let's commit to him. Let's learn again, or for the first time, what is essential for his follower, his disciple, to faithfully live the most meaningful, the most impactful, indeed the best life. Because the goal for all of us is to be a disciple. Not any old student, not any old Sunday worshiper, not a Christian in name only, but a disciple, which is someone who devotedly seeks and nurtures a relationship with Jesus as the teacher, as the rabbi. A disciple is someone who trusts him fully by putting one's life in his hands as our life's leader and Lord. He's number one. A disciple is someone who earnestly seeks his forgiveness for one's wrongs, because he's the one who reconciles us to a loving God and grants us eternal life as our Savior. And fourthly, a disciple is someone who strives to lead the best life, that right life, in order to honor and to give thanks for that holy relationship that we have with Jesus. Matthew wants us, as Jesus does, to be disciples who learn and live Jesus' essential teachings, which are contained in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of his gospel, which we call the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew initiates his teaching with what I'll call an overture. The Beatitudes. Blessed are the. Those are a group of ideals which cast a vision for how the kingdom will be and how the kingdom's inhabitants, the disciples, you and I, will live, are to live. Matthew/Jesus, then, after that overture of the Beatitudes, very quickly gets right into the nitty-gritty. In other words, how to achieve those ideals by being two common items, salt and light. Jesus begins with salt. And so, a little audience participation today. I'd like for you to list for us, I'll use the whiteboard here, what salt does, what its uses are. And then, after we make that list, I'm going to do what Jesus does. I'm going to apply what we know about salt to our lives as a disciple. Talk to us about salt. Say again? Melt snow. Yeah. Yeah. Essential mineral for us. Not a vitamin, but a mineral. Yes. Go ahead. Adds flavor. Absolutely. All right, somebody else was over here. What's that? Preserves food. Yeah, we're going to go with that one. Preserves food. Kills worms. Garden worms or human parasite worms? Kills worms. All right. You know, I didn't have that one on my list. Activates baking powder. A baker would know that. See how much baking I do. Yeah. Emergency antiseptic. So soaking in it, like, okay, so it has some healing properties. Okay, that's kind of related to the antiseptic. Good. Raises blood pressure. Yeah. BP goes up. Oh, buoyancy. Yeah. Great. So, let me take those and kind of combine them in some groups. Let's start with the salt preserves food. That makes sense. Well, disciples are to be a staple item, like salt, preserving what's good, what's right. You know, what of the Jew should be preserved in the Christian, right? I mean, we're going to learn next week that Jesus doesn't abolish the Jewish law and the scriptures. He preserves and values them, which we're to do too. Jesus was raised on those Jewish scriptures. There must be some value to them for us too. Salt preserves. Secondly, salt, as you said, adds flavor. It seasons. Things that are bland are made tasty. And it doesn't take a lot of salt to do that either, right? Just a pinch, judiciously sprinkled here and there, does the trick. So salt takes what flavor is already there and brings out the best. And so there is a lot in the world that just needs a little deliberate help from a disciple. Because salt changes the status quo of food for the better, and disciples are to change the status quo of life for the better too. Too much salt ruins food and beverages. Talk to Deb and me about the dinner we ate on Saturday night, Friday night rather. No. I was at a restaurant. Yeah. A little too much salt. It can damage the food and the beverage, but it can also damage the heart, right? And worms, right? So how do we apply too much salt to the Christian? Well, overbearing, overzealous Christians can do more harm than good, right? Christians need to be forthright, need to be enthusiastic, need to be energetic, but we need to couple that with humility, with gentleness. Salt heals. Got a hurting tooth? Got a sore throat? How many times does the doctor or dentist tell us to, or even mom and dad, gargle with salt, right? It may sting a little. That's part of the healing property. And so as Jesus works in us and challenges us, so disciples must confront and challenge the status quo too. We sometimes need to be candidly honest, faithful, even salty. I didn't say foul, but salty, maybe a bit edgy, with the goal of making things better, with the goal of healing them. Number 5, salt, don't you know, is easily perceived, known, tasted. We know when salt is present. Salt doesn't hide out. We sang about that, right? Don't hide. Likewise, true disciples do not hide when goodness is required. whether that's addressing or redressing some injustice, when it's doing what is right, when it's bringing help and healing to a situation of need or a person who's in need by talking about Jesus' love for them. We need to be like that Good Samaritan, not afraid to do what is right to help somebody's life. And the sixth one that I'll note is, don't we know? Salt stimulates thirst, right? And so disciples are to stimulate a thirst for God, for what's needed, for what is good and right. Our lives are to inspire good change. Okay. So, we dealt with salt. Let's do the same with light. What uses does light have? What do we do with light? Please. A warning? Light can be a warning, like in a lighthouse. Right, excellent. Or the flashing red lights on fire trucks, or the flashing amber light at a school crossing or something. Right, a warning. What else? Good. Helps things grow. Yeah. Chases fear. Yeah, right? You know, we're scared of the dark, turn on a light. Light a candle. Have a flashlight. Excellent. What else? Illuminates. Yeah, how about if we just leave it at that? Illuminates. Provides warmth. You ever get burned by a light bulb? Yeah, there you go. Glowing fire. A light for a... Oh, for colors. Right. Yeah, if you want to see colors, you've got the spectrum, as you said. Yeah, okay, I didn't know where you were going with that. Spectrum, colors, requires light. Yeah, right. Light as a weapon. You want to say something about that? Lasers, okay. Right, do you ever see those flashlights advertised on TV that really... very fast, almost like a strobe, can incapacitate someone. Yeah, a weapon. Good. It can heal. Yeah, grow and heal. Right. Helps you see. Light refracts, which is a vision thing. Right. Very good. That's... where do we have that? Yeah, okay. So it changes things chemically. Light changes things chemically. So for some chemical reactions, it's dependent upon light. Right. What's the word? Photosynthesis. Right? Okay. Great. So yeah, I think the obvious one about light is it allows us to see. It illumines. It changes darkness to light. And so disciples bring the light of God's love to life. In order for God's love to be known, to be experienced, people need to see God's love. And we help by shedding light on God's love. That's up to us to do. It doesn't happen by itself. Secondly, light brings out color and character. If you're in a dark room, even a room that you know well, you can't see what the colors of things are. It's too dark. You many times can't even see if it's a smooth surface or a rough surface. We need light to do that. The light of Christ then brings out the best in us, his disciples. Christians are to be colorful people, not boring people, right? We're to find and create excitement in the things that we do. We're to possess integrity and color in our character, in our personality. And I have to say, you know some preachers and maybe Sunday school teachers like this, who make the Bible and Jesus and faith boring. I got to tell you, it takes more of an effort to make those things boring than to just let them speak for themselves. I mean, we don't need to do much to make Jesus shine, right? He naturally is shining. We're the ones that put a damper on Jesus, right? Light is brightest when closest, right? When Chuck shined that light right in Stan's eyes versus when he shined it back there onto Bill. I mean, Bill was a little bit taken aback by it, but it was brighter, right? But that light can still be seen from a distance. Here's a statistic that you may not be aware of. A single candle can be seen by the naked eye, not with glasses or any special help, can be seen by an eye at a distance of 1.6 miles. Let's put that into context. 3 a.m. in the morning, when there's not lots of traffic out here on Lincoln Highway, go out to Lincoln Highway, look west, and I'll stand there at the courtesy Jeep dealer with a single candle. From a distance of 1.6 miles, you can see that candle. That's pretty amazing. That little light, a distance of 1.6 miles. And so disciples are to brighten wherever we are. What's the old song? Brighten the corner where you are, right? We're to serve in ways that have a lasting and a far-reaching effect. We're not just thinking about helping today. We're thinking about helping today and tomorrow and into the future. Another important fact of physics, dark can never overcome light. Dark can never overcome light. Even one tiny light transforms and puts an end to the darkness, right? And so a disciple's influence is profound in the lives, in our lives, and in the lives of whom we shine Christ's light. Light, you've said this, is power. Light is an energy source for solar-powered machines. Think the solar cells that some people put on their roofs. Think the little solar-powered calculator, right? As well as bringing growth and change to plant and animal life, as you've been talking about. Photosynthesis, we learned that in biology class. And so disciples also possess a holy spiritual power that changes lives for Christ. Because without Jesus right here physically on earth with us, it's up to us to share his light and his power. Number 6, I'm glad you got this one. I didn't know if you were going to be going there, but you sure did. Light refracts and reflects. Refracts is just a fancy word for bends. Reflects is a fancy word for reveals or reproduces. Stand in front of a mirror, right, and it reflects, it reveals us. And so disciples are to reflect Christ in our lives. People need to see a positive change in us due to our faith. We need to reflect his light and love as Christians. And 7, you also got this one. Light is necessary for health, and it heals. It generates vitamin D production in our bodies, which is an important factor in health and even in longevity. Not enough sunlight has that terrible effect on one's physical, and actually terrible effects on one's physical and emotional health. Think of seasonal affective disorder. Not enough sun increases the risk of rickets. Nobody even knows what rickets is anymore. It's that disease of the bones. Not enough light puts us at risk for diabetes, tuberculosis, multiple sclerosis. The list goes on. And so when we, as disciples, bring the light of Christ's love to persons, they too attain health, wholeness, healing. So thank you for telling us what you know about light and what you know about salt. But you know, there was one other aspect that the two have in common. Salt and light do not exist for themselves. Each exists to improve something else. Both make life and things in life better. I mean, think about it. Salt spices life. Light brightens life. And so disciples, too, live for God and others, are a blessing to God and others, because we are to be salt and light to make life better for others, as our life has been made better by God's love. So notice how Jesus took these two simple elements that everybody knows about and applied them to the people who were to loyally follow him, to be devout followers of Jesus, to be disciples. Because living in an age when it's all about the individual, all about the self, as those magazine titles made clear. You know, when anxious people in the anxious crowd question the meaning of their lives, wonder what it's all about, what's the purpose? Disciples know our purpose. And it's not some arrogant realization or knowledge whereby we know something you don't know. No. We're only too glad to share that knowledge, that salt and that light, that love. Because we, Jesus' current disciples, have a purpose beyond ourselves. As we say, a kingdom purpose that loves and serves God and others, that humbly shares God's love in our words and in our deeds, and also makes other disciples who do the same, to improve life, to provide a glimpse of how good life can be with God's love, despite all of the messes and upsets around us. Disciples can no longer let the world's prophets and purveyors of selfishness and doom and division remove us from the mission of God's love. We must cut through that blandness. We must cut through those darkly blinding distractions by serving others, the sinners and the saints, everyone. Like Matthew's early faith community to which he was writing, we must find our unity in service to Jesus, despite the barriers that seek to divide us and take us away from Jesus. Because rather than stand in crippling judgment of one another, so popular in our day, we must do the loving. As bearers of salt and light, we're to be God's love. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.